Every story matters. Every voice counts. You're listening to Cambridge Veritas, where your learning journey becomes the story.
All right, so we're diving into teaching English today, and looks like we're tackling the latest trends and techniques, especially this EPIC thing, right? English for purposes of international communication. And being teachers at Cambridge Veritas, this feels very relevant with students coming from everywhere, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's so fascinating is how English has become this global language, almost like a universal connector, you know what I mean? And the book even says there are more people who speak English as a second language than native speakers.
Wow. Yeah, that really changes things, huh? Makes you wonder, which English are we even teaching? I mean, you have British English and American English, so many variations.
Exactly, and that's where EPIC comes in. It's not about saying one English is the right one, but focusing on what they call a standardized variety for international communication.
Oh,
So it's more like teaching the English that will be understood wherever you go in the world.
I'm starting to get it. So instead of using a word like fortnight, which would leave some students confused, we should stick to 2 weeks.
Exactly, or like the word organize. Teaching it with a Z instead of an S is actually how it's used internationally. It's these little things that can make a huge difference for our students to be understood globally.
Wow, this is making me rethink my own English. But it's not just vocab and grammar, right? EPIC seems much broader.
You're right. It's about giving students the tools to navigate different ways of communicating. Is it an email or a casual conversation? The book calls these different registers. And then you have different domains like business English or academic English. Each has its own vocabulary and style.
So it's about giving students the tools to communicate effectively in any situation.
Precisely. Now, one interesting question the book brings up, does being a native English speaker automatically make you a better teacher? I'm sure this has come up in our discussions at Cambridge Veritas.
Oh, all the time. I mean, we have such a mix of teachers, native speakers, and those who learned English later. I know I've personally learned so much from colleagues who have that firsthand experience of learning a language.
And that's one of the advantages the book talks about with bilingual teachers. They get the struggles, the mindset, and they can even be role models for students. It's like saying, hey, I did it and you can too.
That's great.
In the end, what matters most is a deep understanding of the language, a passion for teaching and connecting with learners no matter where you're from.
It makes you realize that teaching English goes beyond just the language. There's also all the cultural stuff, which the book says can be a minefield.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to fall into the trap of focusing on one target culture, especially when we're dealing with British or American English. But in today's world, teaching only one view of culture isn't good for our students.
Especially at Cambridge Veritas, where we have so many different backgrounds.
Exactly. We need to move away from this idea of a single target culture and promote multicultural awareness, which fits perfectly with EPIC, being able to communicate across cultures.
Makes sense. So we're equipping students to navigate the language and the culture. But what about their first language? Should we try to suppress it, or can it be helpful?
This is where things get interesting. Instead of seeing the first language, or L1, as the enemy, the book wants us to see it as a resource. For example, it says using translation strategically can help learners get new concepts by linking them to something they already know.
So instead of banning the L1, we could use it to bridge the gap between what they know and what they're learning.
Exactly. It's about balance. We don't want the L1 to take over, but we shouldn't shut it out completely.
This all makes me think about my own language learning experiences and all the different methods I've seen. The book does a good job walking through the history of language teaching, from grammar translation to audiolingualism and the direct method.
Oh yeah, I'm sure some of those sound familiar, like grammar translation with all that memorization and translating word for word. Very traditional approach.
Then there's audiolingualism, popular in the mid-20th century. Remember all those drills and repetition, like training a reflex?
Oh yeah, all about drilling those patterns into your head. And then you have the direct method, where you're thrown into the language from day one with no translation.
It's amazing to see how these approaches have shaped how we teach and learn languages.
Totally. And they set the stage for what they call the communicative revolution in the 1980s, which is still really dominant in language teaching today.
So what's so revolutionary about this communicative approach?
It shifted the focus from just grammar to actually being able to communicate well. The idea is that language acquisition happens best through real interactions and authentic tasks.
So it's not about learning grammar in isolation, but actually using the language for real purposes. Makes sense.
Right. And a big part of this is comprehensible input, meaning exposing learners to language they can understand, even if it's slightly above their level.
It's like stretching their language muscles without overwhelming them.
Yeah, and that leads to task-based learning, a popular method within the communicative approach. It's about engaging learners in real-world tasks that make them use the language to achieve a goal.
Sounds way more engaging than memorizing verbs. But once we've got them communicating, how do we measure their proficiency in this new world of English teaching? The book mentions something called CEFR.
Yes, the CEFR, or Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, gives us a standardized way to describe language levels. You've probably seen them: A1, B1, C1, and so on.
Yeah, they're pretty common now. But the interesting thing is that the CFR focuses on what learners can do with the language, not just the grammar they know.
Exactly. It's much more practical. It's about real-world skills.
And speaking of the real world, we can't ignore how technology is impacting education, especially after the pandemic. Remember that sudden shift to online teaching? We all became Zoom experts overnight.
It was a crash course for sure. But it also made us rethink how we teach, experiment with tools, maybe even find some hidden talents.
Definitely pushed us out of our comfort zones.
Yeah.
And I think it's changed how we approach language teaching. We see more blended learning now, mixing online and face-to-face.
And there's hybrid learning where some students are in class and others join remotely. Technology is letting us be more flexible and personalize learning.
It's exciting to see all these innovations happening.
It is, and it brings up a big question for the future. How will technology keep shaping English language teaching? What new things will emerge?
That's a great question. And it makes me wonder what other insights this Teaching English Today book has for us. Ready to dive into part 2?
Let's do it. Before we get too lost in the future, maybe we should think about what all this means for us, as teachers here at Cambridge Veritas.
Oh, that's a good point. We've been going on and on about IPIC and all these teaching methods and technology. But how do we actually put it all into practice with our students?
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest things is to really embrace the diversity of our students. Remember, we have students from all over the place, each with their own background and learning style.
I know. It's one of the things I love most about Cambridge Veritas. Makes every day interesting. But how do we go beyond just noticing this diversity and actually use it to make the learning better?
I think it starts with recognizing that it's not a problem to solve, but something good. We can make sure students learn from each other, share different ideas, and really understand English as a global language.
Oh, I see what you mean. So instead of teaching one right way to speak, we show them all the different accents and ways people talk.
Exactly. It goes back to that whole EPIC thing. It's not about erasing differences or having one standard. It's about giving students the tools they need to communicate across cultures, recognizing that there are lots of ways to use the language.
And that's where we as teachers come in, right? We have to help them navigate all this language and culture stuff.
Definitely. Which means we have to keep learning too, right? Stay updated on methods, explore new technology, and always think about how we can do better.
Yeah, there's a lot to keep up with. But I think that's what makes teaching so rewarding. Always something new things to learn and challenges.
I agree. This deep dive has been a good reminder. It's not just about teaching grammar and vocab. It's about helping our students become confident and fluent communicators, in a global world.
Speaking of which, there's another part of teaching English we should talk about. There's growing demand for English for specific purposes, or ESP.
Ah, ESP.
Yeah.
Yeah, as English becomes more important in different jobs and fields, the need for specific language skills is just booming.
Yeah, we're seeing so many requests for courses in business English, English for academic purposes, English for tourism, you name it.
And it's only going to get bigger as globalization keeps connecting people across borders. So it raises questions for us. How do we keep up with this need for ESP? How do we learn what we need to teach these specialized types of English well?
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's exciting too. We get to learn new vocabulary, industry jargon, and different communication styles for all these fields.
We also have to be aware of the cultural differences in different work settings. It's not just the language, it's how it's used in that context.
It's like tailoring a suit, right? We need to understand what each learner needs and wants, and then create a learning experience that will help them reach their goals.
That's a great way to put it. And it also means we need specific assessment tools too. The CEFR is a good start, but we might need to develop more targeted assessments that look at a learner's abilities in specific areas.
So we can see if they can actually handle a business meeting, write a good academic paper, or do a cross-cultural negotiation. The stakes are higher with ESP because they're using English for their careers.
Absolutely. And that's why giving them real-world experiences is so important. We need to move past textbooks and use real materials and tasks.
Think about case studies, industry reports, simulations, guest speakers from different jobs, all really useful for teaching ESP.
And technology can be huge here too. Online platforms give us access to tons of real materials, and we can create more immersive learning environments. We can connect students with professionals in their field through online mentoring, or use virtual simulations to put them right in the middle of a big international business meeting.
The possibilities are amazing. But like we talked about before, technology is just a tool. It's up to us to use it right and make sure it's actually helping them learn.
I agree. We need to find that balance between the traditional ways of teaching and all these cool new tech tools, always focusing on what the learner needs.
So as we're trying to figure out this ever-changing world of teaching English, with all this emphasis on global communication, different learning styles, and the need for specialized English, it's really important to be teachers who think and adapt.
Absolutely. We need to be open to new ideas, be curious about new approaches and technology, and never stop trying to get better.
And most importantly, we have to remember why we do this. It's not just about teaching grammar rules and vocabulary. It's about helping our students communicate in English with confidence, connect with people from different backgrounds, and reach their full potential in our interconnected world.
That's a great way to put it. It's been fun talking about this with you.
Same here. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive is giving you some things to think about and maybe even inspired you. We hope you keep exploring these ideas and especially think about how you can use them in your own teaching.
Remember, teaching English is a journey, always learning, growing, and seeing our students succeed.
That's so true. So let's face those challenges, enjoy those wins, and keep working to be the best teachers we can be. Until next time, happy teaching. Thinking about ESP and technology, it seems like this is where we can really get creative and try new things in the classroom.
Oh, definitely. We've talked about some of the cool tools out there, but imagine using virtual reality for ESP. Like, we could create these simulations where students are at a big international business conference or even like a medical procedure, so they can practice their language in a really realistic and fun way.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's not just about fancy simulations. We can also use technology to work on specific language skills, like online dictionaries and those corporate things to help them learn all those specialized words, or even like interactive exercises where they can practice presentations in front of a virtual audience.
Yeah, and don't forget online mentoring. We can connect our students with actual professionals in their field from anywhere in the world. Those connections can give them insights and real-world knowledge that we as teachers might not have.
It's really incredible what technology can do for both teachers and learners. But like we said before, it all comes down to how we use it. We have to choose the right tools and make sure they're helping, not distracting.
I agree. It's finding that balance between how we've always taught and all these new technologies, and always remembering that the learner is the most important.
So to wrap up our look at teaching English today, it's clear that this field is always changing. There are always challenges and new things to try, and we as teachers need to be ready to adapt and be creative.
Yeah, for sure. We need to be open to new ideas, keep learning about new approaches and technology, and always be looking for ways to do better.
And the biggest thing is to remember why we do this. It's not just grammar and vocabulary. It's about giving our students the power to communicate well in English, connect with people from all over, and be their best in this connected world we live in.
I like that. It's been great talking about all this with you.
I agree. And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive was helpful and made you think. We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, check out the resources we mentioned, and most importantly, think about how you can use all this in your own teaching.
Remember, teaching English is a journey, always learning, growing, and seeing our students do well.
Well said. Let's embrace the tough parts, celebrate the good parts, and keep trying to be the best teachers we can be. Until next time, happy teaching.